What's going on, ladies, gents, and kids of all ages? It is Eric coming back at you once again from the Nerd Cave, and today we have another excellent deck tech for you. We're talking about kind of my version of a deck that's been gaining popularity. It's seen some top 8, so I think the deck has definitely proven its relevance as maybe one of the best aggro decks in the game right now. It's definitely a budget-ish option if you have Rapunzels already. It's not too much to get into the rest of the deck. If you don't have those Rapunzels or you weren't playing during first chapter, that's going to be a major hurdle for you. Another aggro deck may be a better option. I do feel like they're fairly important to the deck because one of the things that's lacking without them is card draw, and you're going to see that in my version of the list. I'm steering into that even further than we've seen other decks kind of steer into it in the past. But I think the deck is great. But before we launch into talking about that a little bit deeper, as always, a big shout out to the Patreons for making giveaways on the channel possible. Very excited about the announcements that we've been able to make over there recently. We have some exciting things happening on the channel. We may have a new channel sponsor coming very soon, which is pretty exciting. So keep an eye out for that. And if you haven't subscribed, now is a great time to do so. We're hoping to parlay all of that funding into additional giveaways. If you guys don't know, the money that we're making from any of those Patreons or anything like that is going 100% back to giveaways on the channel and Patreon exclusive giveaways. So if you're not supporting the channel, if you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. Patreon, you can join for $1, so jump over there, check that out. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and talk about Lemon Lime Aggro. So first up in the 1-cost slot, you guys I'm sure saw this coming. You gotta play it in anything with that lemon portion of the aggro, and that is Daisy Duck Donald's Date, a 1-cost uninkable 1/4 stat line questing for 2 with a bit of a drawback ability where your opponent is going to get to look at the top card of their deck, and if it is a character card, they are going to put it into their hand. Not quite as bad in the current meta when you're looking at some of those Sapphire decks out there that are playing like 30 to 40 non-character cards. So Daisy Duck, not so much of a feel bad anymore. Another card I like, even in the steel meta, is going to be Fred, Mascot by Day, a 1-cost inkable 1/1 stat line questing for 1 with whenever this character is challenged, gain 2 lore. He's obviously only going to get challenged once, but that is more than enough. You get that 2 lore one time. It is such a burst in the early game that it is just going to kind of put you in the driver's seat for the rest of the game, which is hugely beneficial. It is also worth noting, one of the things that some people had the most issues with out of my Amethyst deal list, which I fully stand by, is playing Fire the Cannon, since it is taking an uninkable slot. So I really think that a lot of people aren't playing Fire the Cannons in the current meta. A lot of people are playing those songs instead, especially because with those Sapphire decks they can do the Bell on 1, user sing. You look at something like Steel Song, of course they're playing Cinderella, so they're going to play the songs, they're not going to play Fire the Cannons. Long story short, even if they're singing it, the removal that they have access to costs 3. So if they're using a 3-cost card in their deck to remove a 1-cost character so that you don't gain 2 lore, I am more than okay with that. Next up, also in the 1-cost slot, one of the additions from the new set, and that is going to be for Lady Elegant Spaniel, a 1-cost, another uninkable 1-cost character, 1/2 stat line questing for 1. But when you have a character named Tramp in play, she's going to be questing for 2, so she is going to get up to that 1-cost questing for 2, and she has a better stat line than something like Lilo, and she combos in with some of the other cards, so she's definitely worth playing. We'll talk about those other cards as we move forward. Then last up in the 1-drop slot, we are on for Nala, a card I've been talking about since my Amber Sapphire list, kind of pushing that out onto the map a couple sets ago. If you haven't seen those videos, I think they're still pretty relevant. I think Amber Sapphire could still come around and be good, and that deck is still a good base to do it. But Nala is a fantastic card, especially to combo with Rapunzel. She has a 1-cost inkable 0/4 stat line, so she has enough willpower to potentially heal her with Rapunzel and get that 3-card draw. And she is questing for 1, which never too bad. I'm not playing the Little Johns. We did see a version of this deck playing Nala and Little John. I think it's too many 0 attack characters, even with potential attack boosts. Next up in the 2-cost slot, a card that is too good not to play in this deck. This deck is using some discard functionality to potentially put characters into your discard pile directly without them ever being on the field. So when you look at a card like Lilo Escape Artist, a 2-cost inkable 1/2 stat line questing for 2, with an ability at the start of your turn, if this card is in your discard, you may play it and she enters play exerted. It's almost as if when you discard her that you never discarded her at all. Like you still effectively have her in your hand because you still have access to being able to play her if that's what's going to be the best. Obviously when you're playing her from the discard, she is coming to play exerted, which you wouldn't do from your hand. But if you have to discard a character, Lilo Escape Artist is a great option. Next up, still in the 2-drop slot, we are on 3 Piglet Pooh Pirate Captain. I've seen versions of the list playing 4. I almost want to play none when I play aggro. I almost think Wendy Darling is better. She quests for 2 instead of 3, but it's guaranteed 2. You don't need any additional characters out, and she has a 1-3 stat line, so she's a little bit harder for those steel decks to deal with. There's a lot of steel in the meta right now, so I think that there's an argument for playing Wendy Darling, but Piglet, very good. People have agreed he's good in the meta. If you're not playing against Steel, he is obviously fantastic, but if you're playing against Steel, maybe you just ink him and play something else on 2. But he's a 2-cost inkable 2/2 stat line questing for 1, and if you have 2 or more other characters in play, he's questing for 3. So obviously that's what you're pushing for with him, is to try to get that quest for 3 at least once. Next up in the 2-cost slot, we are on 4 Ursula Deceiver, a 2-cost inkable 1/3 stat line questing for 1. With when you play this character, you get to look at your opponent's hand. It just on its own, like, that ability is already fantastic because you have an idea what they're going to have. You have an idea if you're free and clear to play your piglets and stuff like that. You get to force them to discard a song from their hand of your choosing. It's a great way to snipe out those songs that are going to be problematic for you against some of those lower willpower characters. Another card I haven't necessarily seen every version of this deck playing, but I still think is very good, is 3 Simba Protective Cub, a 2-cost inkable 2/3 stat line questing for 1 with Bodyguard. He's probably only going to take 1 hit, and he may not banish the thing that's challenging into him, because since we do have a lot of 3 willpower characters out there, still having Simba down to block those little squishies and maybe get another quest in can be huge. It can really throw your opponent off. Last card in the 2-drop slot, and one of the cards that really made me want to build a deck around these characters, is Tramp Enterprising Dog, a 2-cost inkable 1/3 stat line questing for 1. But if you have a character named Lady in play, so this is where I was talking about that kind of combination, he costs 1 less to play. So it's a 1-cost character with a 1/3 stat line who quests for 1. Obviously that's similar to Mini and stuff like that, but he has an additional ability, and this is what makes him so much better. And that's when you play this character, chosen character of yours gets +1 strength this turn for each other character you have in play. So if you have 2 other characters in play, you throw Tramp down, you're going to be able to give that character +2. Believe it or not, you can actually make that play on turn 2 of the game. So you can go turn 1 Daisy Duck, turn 2 you play Lady so that he costs 1 less, and you play the Tramp so that you can give your Daisy Duck +2. All of a sudden she's a 3/4 stat line on the second turn of the game, and she is very much able to banish a bell. It's kind of crazy. So Tramp, really good, and he's inkable. Next up in the 3-cost slot, kind of jumping back to that more traditional type of aggro build, there's 2 different ways to kind of go about playing this deck. So in some instances, maybe you're playing Donald Duck and trying to play a more traditional aggro play line. In some instances, maybe you're inking the Donald Duck and you're going with something a little bit more mid-rangey. This deck is capable of either option. So Donald Duck Musketeer Soldier is a 3-cost inkable 2/3 stat line, same as Simba, questing for 1, has Bodyguard, same as Simba. But when he comes into play, he's going to give one of your other characters +1 lore. So if you have one of those 1-cost characters questing for 2, you throw down a Donald Duck, all of a sudden they're questing for 3, and you're potentially able to get up to 10 or 11 lore in the first few turns of the game. Next up, one of the cards, again, we're not necessarily seeing on the lists that have been out there, but I think is very good since this deck can definitely use some additional card draw, is going to be Julietta Madrigal, Excellent Cook. She is a 3-cost inkable 1/4 stat line questing for 1. With when you play this character, you may remove 2 damage instead of 3 from another character, and you just draw 1 card instead of 2 like you might with Rapunzel. I think the thing that's really cool about Julietta is your opponent isn't always necessarily in a position where they're going to expect you to play a Julietta on 3, so you can do something like turn 1 Daisy, turn 2 Lady and the Tramp, attack in with Daisy. It's very likely it's going to survive whatever it's challenging into. If they're not banishing it on that next turn, thinking that, oh, he's not going to have Rapunzel until 4, then all of a sudden on 3 you drop a Julietta, heal 2 damage off of that Daisy Duck. It can be super oppressive to your opponent. So I think Julietta is really good, and you're drawing an additional card at that time, just getting ready to further fuel your turn 4. Although this one is a 3-drop, I don't think this is necessarily what you want to play on 3. I feel like this card is a game closer, and that is Prince Philip Royal Explorer, a 3-cost inkable 3/2 stat line questing for 2 with Ward, one of the very few green characters with Ward, so he is going to not be targetable by anything your opponent is doing. They are obviously going to be able to play something like Be Prepared, get him off the board that way, but if they have the Be Prepared and they're Be Prepared to deal with the Prince Philip, you're obviously in a pretty good board position as it is. But when you're getting into those later turns, being able to slam down a character with Ward that your opponent can't just remove is the difference between closing out 18 to 20 lore and just sitting there at 18 lore while your opponent removes the card you're top decking every turn. That is also why this card deck is trying to draw more cards in its current form, is to kind of prevent just top decking, which was a big issue for Lemon Lime during the previous set. Next up in the 4-cost slot, and a card that's definitely very specific to this type of Chernodog build, and that is going to be Dale, Mischievous Ranger, a 4-cost inkable 3/4 stat line questing for 1, so definitely a solid stat line. You don't have a lot of big tanky characters in this deck, so something like Dale is pretty good, but 3/4 stat line questing for 1, and when you play this character, you may put the top 3 cards of your deck into your discard to give chosen character -3 strength until the start of your next turn. So if you're looking to take a challenge in and you use Dale, you can potentially give something -3 strength, and then if you're sitting on something like Prince Philip, all of a sudden he's in a much better position to challenge, because maybe you're challenging into something that's now dealing him 0 damage. This is really good. Also potentially putting 3 characters into your discard, since this deck is made up of 60 characters. Next up in the 4-cost slot, and one of the cards I mentioned is very much in this deck list, pre-warned you at the beginning of the video, is for Rapunzel Gifted with Healing. Since we are also playing Julieta, I don't have a recommended alternative for this card in this deck. I think this card is hugely important to this deck, and if you're looking to play the deck, even if you have 3 Rapunzels and can up the count of something else, play it. If you have 2 Rapunzels, play it. If you have 1 Rapunzel, I would maybe think about tweaking the deck list and going with a different color combination, potentially something where you're going to have more access to card draw like Amber Amethyst. But Rapunzel is a 4-cost inkable 1/5 stat line questing for 2, and when you play this character, remove up to 3 damage from one of your characters, draw a card for each damage removed this way. Super crazy card still to this day. The fact that it comes out on 4, it's got that 1/5 stat line, it quests for 2, it's giving you potentially up to 3 cards in your hand, and it's healing a character. It's just a bonkers combination of things. This card just keeps going up and up in price. We've seen some first chapter restocks, so potentially this will be a good time to pick up those Rapunzels if you haven't already. We may see them dip back down to the 40-45 range. Next up, we have 2 Lady Miss Park Avenue, a card that I played in our draft at the beginning of every new set. The store that I play at hosts a draft so that players can get some new cards and we can just kind of enjoy the set without all the pressure of having to get all those crazy cards within the first few days of the set coming out, since we play on Sundays. Drafted this card is absolutely broken in draft. 5-cost uninkable 4/4 stat line questing for 2, shifting for 3. I didn't have a shift target for it in the draft. Obviously this deck very much does have a shift target on it, so you can get it out on 3. And when you play this character, you may return up to 2 characters with cost 2 or less from your discard to your hand. Not always the play line you're going to want to be on in this deck. Typically I think she's almost better later in the game as opposed to focusing on shifting her early, but if you're trying to go super hard aggro and your opponent's blowing up everything you're doing, you got a couple Daisy Ducks in the bin or something like that, you want to dig them back up, Lady could definitely be good earlier in the game in that position. Another card to get those 1-cost ladies questing for 2 is going to be Tramp Street Smart Dog, a 7-cost inkable 2/6 stat line questing for 2 with 2 abilities. Now it's a party. For each character you have in play, you pay 1 less to play this character. Super good. So if you're going like turn 1 1-drop, turn 2 2 1-drops, turn 3 you play one of those 3-drops like Donald Duck to be able to guard your board, and then you're sitting with 4 guys out on the board. Even if they deal with that Donald Duck and 1 more of them, you still have 2 guys out going in that turn 4. If you're getting those early game characters out and you're developing a few characters in the first few turns, then you're looking at potentially being able to play Tramp on 4 as full value, or on 5 at a reduced cost hopefully. But Tramp can be really good, and when you play this character, you may draw a card for each other character you have in play, then choose and discard that many cards. So that may not seem like the best ability, but when you're trying to fuel the cards that are in your discard, it can be really good. And like I mentioned, if you have those Lilos in your hand, discarding Lilos is never a feel bad. And then the last card, and the reason you want to get those characters in your discard with some of the other characters we talked about, is of course Chernobog Evildoer, hence the name of the deck, Chernodog, a 10-cost 9/9 stat line questing for 3. For each character in your discard, you pay 1 less to play him, and when you play this character, you shuffle all your characters from your discard pile back into your deck, recycling and effectively starting over and digging back into those daisies and all those other wonderful characters you want to be able to play again. The thing that's really neat about this is if you're throwing down a more squishy 1-drop character like Lady and getting those early game quests and just kind of going aggressive, like turn 1 Lady, turn 2 Tramp, turn 2 another character, preferably 2 1-drop, turn 3 you start going into those bodyguards, you're already potentially getting 4 characters into your bin if they're banishing those, and then you throw down something like Dale and throw 3 more characters into your bin, you're sitting at potentially 7 characters going into that turn 5, and you're able to play a Chernobog for 3, as well as still develop additional characters if you have 4 or 5 ink at that time. So Chernobog, Super good. Being able to get him out that fast and that early in the game is a game changer with how well he is going to potentially function. Obviously, he is going to be able to be removed by things like Let It Go, which is going to feel bad if it happens, but I don't even think a lot of those Sapphire decks are playing Let It Go, and if they are playing Let It Go, it's only a couple of them. Hopefully you're able to fuel them onto the board before your opponent's ready to be prepared in those Ruby Sapphire matchups, or wait until they do be prepared and then throw them down after. Then they have to answer him with an additional be prepared, because I don't think they have anything else in their deck that's going to be able to drop his strength low enough to remove him. Maybe they could do something like Lady Tremaine if they're on that play line, but you could think about, you know, on that turn when you do have that additional ink, maybe you're going Turnabog and another character just in case your opponent does Lady Tremaine. But there's a lot to think about with Turnabog, but he is a very good character. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this deck list in the comments below. I think it's really a lot of fun. I think my version of the build is not necessarily more aggressive, but I think it is more able to keep up in the mid game and into the late game. If it pushes that far with the additional card draw, I think is potentially going to be really important. I also thought it could potentially be fun to make a new green Faucet deck list that's taking advantage of some of these mechanics. If you guys would like to see that, let me know in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. We're on our way to 3,000 subs and another giveaway. When you see those toys, video games, and big old Chernabogs off in the distance, remember, it is not a mirage. You guys have a great day.